Good morning, councillors. Good morning to those joining us through the digital gallery again this morning. And good morning to those of the executive team joining us today. I note that this is a special meeting of the 12th of January and that we have limited attendance of the executive team based on availability, but also on the nature of the material. And the GM Council Sustainability is here, and the CEO is also with us in the room, along with the Principal Specialist Governance at this time to provide advisory support to today's considerations. In declaring the meeting open, I would again acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet and also the land that form the basis for our great region. I pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and again congratulate them on their continued nurture of culture. Note a full attendance of councillors. I've already explained the attendance or otherwise of the executive. We move to item 4 and we come to declarations of interest pertaining to the one item of business we have before us today. Any declarations, councillors? If not, councillors, if you'll bear with me, in accordance with the requirements of Section 150EW of the Local Government Act 2009, I'm required to advise the chair of this meeting, which in this case is me, if I reasonably believe or suspect that another councillor has either a prescribed or declarable conflict of interest pertaining to a decision of council without having declared that conflict of interest. Councillors, I therefore advise in my reasonable belief that Councillor Swanborough has a declarable conflict of interest in deciding on the matter, the subject of this special meeting. Firstly, I'd like to take you back to the ordinary meeting held on 7th of September 2021, where I informed Council that I held a reasonable belief that Councillor Swanborough had a declarable conflict of interest. I formed that belief from a series of public comments made over an extended period that appeared to indicate negative views towards the Chief Executive Officer for the proper execution of his duties. I believed that, due to the conflict, there was a likelihood that Councillor Swanborough was unable to make an impartial decision in item 11.1 of that meeting, being the decision on the reappointment of the Chief Executive Officer. Since that meeting, I've been made aware of confidential matters and information which has provided further insight into the relationship between the CEO and Councillor Swanborough. These confidential matters and additional information provide supporting evidence as to the nature of the councillor's relationship with the CEO and his personal interest in the decision whether to reappoint the CEO. I'm restricted from publicly providing any further detail on those matters due to confidentiality obligations, but I refer councillors to the copy of recently provided legal advice that is attached to the report for the agenda item today. The advice provides a legal opinion on whether Councillor Swanborough had a declarable conflict of interest regarding the decision to reappoint the CEO. The advice is consistent with my belief about the councillor's conflict and by extension my belief that the conflict remains for the agenda item today. The question for councillors to determine is whether Councillor Swanborough has or could reasonably be presumed to have a conflict because of his personal interest in the decision on the reappointment of the CEO. It's my view that an independent, fair-minded person would consider there was a real possibility that the councillor has a personal bias against the CEO, as evident by the confidential information along with the public comments that have been made. It's my belief that the councillor could not make an impartial decision regarding the appointment of the CEO or the decision to rescind the previous resolution not to reappoint. I'd also like to remind the Chamber that in determining this conflict of interest issue, councillors exercise caution in their commentary so as not to breach confidentiality obligations. I believe the process is now for Councillor Swanborough to respond. Councillor Swanborough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the introduction. Mr. Mayor, I too have read the advice, which I don't intend to reveal in any detail today, but I maintain that the Council's decision on the 9th of November was a correct decision. They were acting on all the information that was able to be legally provided at the time. I don't believe that the new information that you refer to in the legal advice has in any way changed my view about whether I have a conflict of interest, but as the legislation requires, I'm certainly in the hands of the Council to determine that matter, because the nice thing about the legislation is it talks about would a reasonable person come to a conclusion about whether someone has a conflict of interest, because conflicts of interest are very much individual and very much circumstantial. And so that's why the legislation does this. It does it so that the test of a reasonable man can be applied to determine what might be. And that test of a reasonable man is a universal test, but it's also a test for the councillors around the table. It assumes that the councillors around the table are 7 reasonable people, and therefore that's why the legislation gives the opportunity to vote on this particular matter. Now, I don't have a personal interest with the CEO. I can say that everybody may be aware that even though the legislation forbids me from saying, but in these circumstances, I think I'll break that convention and say that, yes, I have made complaints about the CEO, but they are defensive. They are not about actions which I've done any wrongdoing. They're about actions which I think the wrongdoing has been done. We work in the local government system. The local government system is a whole series of legislation which the government has put in place, and it only comes into place if you're a councillor. So it is ordinary business. I use the term ordinary business because it's ordinary business for anybody in this room to be able to make a complaint about another councillor or an officer, and it's also their right, and they should accept that complaints can also be made about them. And of course, we know for a fact that that happens across Queensland local government everywhere. There are literally many thousands of complaints that councillors have made against councillor. I know in the OIA inquiry at the moment, it talks about 50% of all complaints that go to the OIA are about one councillor complaining about another councillor. I mean, this is ordinary business. It's legislated and it's there for a purpose, as is all the other acts that we have at our disposal. We have the Ombudsman as an institution. We have the legislation like public interest disclosures, which are done for a reason, to maintain that the decisions of organisations and councils and whatever are made in the public interest. You know, we have RTI applications that we can do this so that we can maintain information is dispersed in the public interest. We have all these laws that ensure that the public is put first, the public is number one. And so merely by making a complaint against a person or another councillor does not give rise to a situation where they have a bias about that particular person. That would be nonsensical and absolutely unworkable in the Queensland legislation if that were the case. And so I maintain, as a councillor, you know, I have been given the responsibility under Section 12 of the Local Government Act of being responsible, along with every other councillor in this room, for the performance of the local government. And another power that has been given to this council, which can't be delegated to anybody, is to appoint a CEO. And that has been why I believe that it's my responsibility to participate in those things. I don't have any bias. I reiterate my words of the 9th of November when I had to go through this process one other time. Merely making a complaint does not warrant a personal relationship against a person. That is absolutely nonsense. My relationship with the CEO is a business relationship, and it's based on all the rules and regulations that are given to councillors right across the spectrum. We have to accept that and deal with it and operate within that framework. And that's all that has been going. Am I a competent person then to assess whether the CEO's contract should be renewed or not? Well, of course I am. I've sat here under this decision-making table, and I probably more than anybody have had dealings with CEOs in this capacity as a councillor and as an officer more than anybody in their lifetime. I think it's in the public interest and the interest of all ratepayers of the Scenic Rim that I use that expertise in the judgment about what is the best outcome for the residents and ratepayers of the Scenic Rim going forward into the future. That's what I bring to the table. I believe that is in the public interest. So in summing up, I will say that no, I don't have a conflict of interest. I don't even agree with the legal opinion that is before the council at the moment. I think it's full of subjectiveness. I believe that I could easily provide another legal opinion or several legal opinions to say that I do not have a conflict of interest. The conflict of interest can only be determined around this room by a vote by the councillors, and that is the reality of the situation. So later on down the track, if anybody in this room wants to challenge me about my conflicts of interest, they're perfectly entitled to make a complaint against me. It'll go through the OIA, it might go then to a tribunal, it might go then to QCAT, it might go to a magistrate's court, who knows what it's going to do. But that's the process of determining through a legal process of whether someone has a conflict of interest. At this point in time, I don't believe I have a conflict of interest. It hasn't been proven. You can't listen to a legal opinion that says that I have. It's merely an opinion. And so for those reasons, you know, I would urge the council to consider the framework that we operate in and to find that I do not have a conflict of interest in this matter.
Thank you, councillor. I think you were given the opportunity to go far wide-ranging in your comments. Councillors, we have a decision before us, and we have some, as I indicated, additional information beyond what we had when we commenced the process. To you, councillors, Councillor Enright, do you wish to speak? Councillor Swanborough, can you switch your microphone off, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and I acknowledge both points of view that were raised this morning. However, I would move that Councillor Swanborough does have a declarable conflict of interest in item 6.1 of today's agenda and should not participate in this discussion.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor McCollum, you wish to...
Can I ask Councillor Enright a question now, or is that...
you can ask a question. Just ask a question, yes.
Yeah. Back on the 7th of September, I think it was, when we asked this, you voted that he didn't. What was it that changed your mind that he now does?
Thank you for the question. The content of the content for the reasons that I have a changed view on this is outlined in the confidential report of the agenda, which I can't disclose any content in an open meeting, but is very much provided for us all to read.
So were you unaware that Councillor Swanborough had made complaints against the CEO?
I'm just going to be be cautious about where you go in the confidentiality. Whilst I'm concerned that Councillor Swanborough chose to breach it, because that may well have breached other people's rights. I'm just cautioning councillors, please respect the process. If you wish to consider the understanding of the legal advice, procedurally we could retire into a closed and table that motion and take a procedural motion to go into closed if you want to clarify what's in the legal advice. Otherwise, I'd just ask to be cautious.
No, I'm not asking about anything in there. I'm just asking, did he not know that there had been to and fro between the CEO and Derek in relation to
Councillor Connell, happy to
conflicts?
answer that question along with, in a way that the information that I was given on at the 7th of September led me to the decision of how I voted. Since then, subsequent information has been provided that has given me the belief that Councillor Swanborough has a declared conflict of interest in the information provided.
Thank you. I did submit some questions via email. Are they?
They're not pertinent to the consideration of the... They might be pertinent to the history around the other matter, Councillor, but they need to be dealt with at a different time if they're the questions I'm thinking of.
Okay.
They are questions that don't relate to this, they relate to other activities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah. Well, I've just got to say, I don't think that Councillor Swanborough has a declarable conflict of interest. I don't think anything that was seen...
Point of order, Mayor.
Yeah, just a second. Yep. A second. Yes. So firstly, we have, before we move forward with talking to the motion, I need a seconder. Sorry. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Councillor West, thank you. Now, Councillor Enright gets to speak first to this matter.
Thank you, Mayor. I have put considerable thought into providing an appropriate response to this question. It is incredibly important in the aspects of our council to ensure that we have maintained, and I refer to the Queensland Government Department of Local Government, managing conflicts of interest. Our quick reference guide and 3 key words are outlined there in managing conflicts of interest: to ensure transparency, accountability and integrity as a councillor. You must manage conflicts of interest between the public interest, your interests and the interests of your related persons. And it is important that we maintain transparency, accountability and integrity in this chamber.
You wish to speak against, Councillor?
No, I thought we're still doing questions.
Sorry, if you have a further question. No, we've got a motion on the table now. Do you have an additional question? So you started to comment as though you were responding to the matter. So the councillor has now spoken for his motion. Do you have an additional question? I'll allow it.
You moved the motion, didn't you?
No.
Oh.
Moved Councillor Enright, seconded Councillor West. So do you have further? I'll allow an additional question.
What happened to questions and discussion?
Well, I was asking for questions and you'd ask your question and then, so please go ahead and ask your question. I'm happy to allow.
I'm just confused where we're at. So we were doing questions and discussion and then we moved the motion, don't we? And then all of a sudden.
So the councillor had tabled a motion.
Yeah.
So he had moved a motion straight away. And you started with questions after that. So I'm happy that you continue. I thought you had closed out your question and you'd asked about your other questions, remember?
Yeah.
And had clarity that they weren't relevant to today. But if you have another question, please
I've got
proceed.
lots of questions, that's all.
Please just go ahead to Councillor.
We're at the process. So are we still in questions and discussion?
You can pose your question, yes.
Okay, so this one's to you, Mr. Mayor. If I have disagreements with either the CEO or yourself within council business, but I don't advertise it and I don't make it public, and we disagree on things and I make complaints, does that then negate my ability to make decisions on council matters? Where does it stop? Just because you have disagreements with how someone operates or how they work, where does it stop? You know, if say Michael and I had disagreements with Oliver's work and we didn't publicly do it, and then something come up about, not Oliver, sorry, GM sustainability, where does the conflict end? I mean, we're all going to have disagreements with how each other works, but where does that turn into a bias? And I know it's about the employment of the CEO, but where does the bias end and start? So,
Councillor, I can't give a hypothetical response to a set of hypothetical circumstances. We regularly have alternate views around a range of issues at the table. That's clearly part of public record, that we hold those different views, we discuss different points of view, and we arrive at conclusions. But that's based on transparency of all the information relevant, and where conflict of interest matters come up, we're required to ensure that we've provided adequate, proper, full information for other councillors to consider if we believe such. I can't give you a hypothetical about what creates a precedent, because that's just not for me to do. That is not for, that's such a general comment would be imprudent for anyone to try to hypothesise.
But that's what we're doing now.
Sorry, Councillor. Councillor, you're now moving from finish your questions, and I'll note that we have a motion on the table to discuss, and I think the discussion before us today, it's difficult without moving into confidential to discuss what's in the legal advice, but the discussion before us today is actually not what you're depicting it as. I believe from what I've read, it's about what information was made available to councillors at the time, and so that's a very different perspective. But please ask your further questions before we move into a discussion of the motion.
Okay.
Yeah, well, he's thinking about that.
Sorry, Councillor, you're not to participate further. You've made your comments. You don't get to participate in this deliberation. I'm sorry, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, that's not exactly correct.
Sorry, Councillor.
The situation is that people can ask me questions and I can
Sorry,
respond.
Councillor. Actually, no. The people can ask the chair to provide questions to you. Otherwise, you to be silent, please, Councillor. Is that understood? Sorry, Councillor McConnell.
Okay. Can I ask a question to Councillor West, Chair?
You can, Councillor, so long as it's about clarity and not about trying to prosecute the basis of their consideration.
Okay. Can I ask if Councillor West was aware of the to and fro between the CEO and Councillor Swanborough, additional to what was provided on the 7th of September?
No, at the time I wasn't, which is why I voted the way I did, but I do recall that the matter was raised and I knew nothing about it, but now everything, then we found out a bit more information, so.
That's all I've got at the moment. I may have some.
Thank you. Councillors, if there's any other points you wish to get clarity on, otherwise Councillor McConnell,
Go back.
were you?
Can we ask when this legal advice was requested?
Actually, Councillor, again, not relevant to the considerations at this time of this. You can certainly something you can explore further, but not relevant to the consideration of the conflict of interest discussion at this time. Maybe there are aspects of that included in the report for today. Again, that because that stays confidential, it's important that we don't bring that out into open because it's part of the confidential report. So I'm happy if you wish to request to move into closed to have clarity around that.
I think this all needs to be in open, Mr. Mayor. I think moving anything like this into closed is going to have huge repercussions out in the community. As Councillor Enright said, the three key words in here: integrity, openness, and in the public interest. So, I mean,
Councillor,
if we move this into closed session.
Sorry, Councillor, the challenge that I'm faced with, as you know, because of the nature of the report and the nature of the matter that gave rise to this being back at the table, is that it is clearly bound by some very stringent confidentiality requirements. So bringing any aspect of that into public would, from my point of view, would have us in breach.
So
and that's the challenge.
Is that the legal, anything in the legal advice we can't bring out? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that because at the moment the legal advice is provided as part of a confidential report, okay, and it's until we go in and consider that matter because of the nature of the matters that give rise to it, the danger of putting that in public is that we breach our confidentiality obligations in another jurisdiction. I have sought clarity of that in preparing for today to be able to address that concern. So happy if you wish to adjourn to get some clarity from governance or from as to why that's the case. But again, it is because there are other matters at play in other jurisdictions that are referenced in this report that we are not able to bring it out and bring that content into the public arena. I'm sorry, that's just the reality of the circumstance. This is not an easy circumstance. This is a very abnormal circumstance, I agree.
So
Sorry, just a second.
Can I have a point of order here? And I think it probably asks the question in a different way. We were advised on the 20th of December or thereabouts that this had taken place. Was legal advice sought on this before we were advised?
I can't answer that. And I, again...
Someone, because I think it is very relevant
I think it's really
to this
relevant.
motion.
So, well, I don't believe, I don't see the relevance of it. So asking the question about when council became aware of the matter, I believe that is already identified in the report.
No, I don't think it gives us a date. Just says sorry. Just says subsequent. Because obviously I think my three questions need to be in open.
Which three questions,
The three questions that I sent you.
Again, Councillor, they are not pertinent to this and very much run the risk of being seen as taking retributive action against a council officer for discharging their public interest disclosure requirements. So be very cautious about what you're trying to pursue, councillor, because if it is seen that way,
Yep.
you have certainly then at risk of causing harm to someone who's acted in good faith to fulfil the obligations of their role. So that's the real
Yep.
complexity here, which is why, again, councillor, I am happy to adjourn for 5 minutes. If to seek further guidance, I look to the GM. Yeah, microphone.
Mr. Mayor, if with your forbearance, we can certainly, in nondescript terms, to move the matter on, to provide clarity around that question, the way I interpret it, if that's okay.
I don't need to know who, just when now.
No, that's right. So without putting in terms and obviously in mindful of the confidentiality, upon receipt of that particular matter, given that it was a unique nature to council, legal advice was sought at that point in time.
And what date was that, was what was requested?
I believe it was the 17th of November when council was in receipt of getting that correspondence, and I believe that was furnished to the councillors on that particular day, a hard copy, and councillors had
No,
it.
that was December we got the hard copy.
It was probably the start of December, but we only just got it, and we obviously had to get legal assistance in terms of how much we can provide. Does that provide any?
No, I'm happy to pass on to someone else at the moment.
Sorry, Councillor McGuinness, did that address your?
Yeah. I think the question is, was it after the 5th of November? That's a pertinent question, really.
Sorry, after the 9th of November?
No, 9th of November,
Yes.
sorry, 9th of November, and yeah. Yeah, I didn't thank you to the GM for clarifying that. I didn't think it was any big deal, really.
So, sorry, Councillor Chalk.
Yeah, just got a quick question, Mr. Mayor. We're obviously here to judge whether Councillor Swamber's got a conflict of interest because of a complaint he has lodged.
Sorry, Councillor, that's not the basis of what again, read what was tabled. It's more than, and again, please stop making, even though Councillor Swamborough has made reference, we're here to determine whether there's a conflict of interest pertaining to the relationship with the CEO, and whether that was, and that's the stage one of the conversation. Yes. So.
Okay, so we're here to make a judgment about Councillor Swamborough's conflict. On the basis of what we're been disclosed as evidence that we need to consider, is there anybody else in the chamber that would also have to consider whether they have the same conflict in judging Councillor Swamborough?
Actually, Councillor, that's not a matter for, that's not a reasonable matter in this consideration. This is about conflicts with the item being considered by council. That's what we're here to consider.
It's been considered by non-conflicted councillors.
Councillors who are not conflicted with that matter. With that matter, Councillor. For clarity.
Sorry, to be a question to you, Mayor. Given that response, given that the CEO and yourself were part of that together.
Sorry, Councillor. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to, but I'm going to caution you very much that if you're stating what I think you're stating, you're breaching confidentiality about the matter we're not allowed to discuss. You are really in danger of stepping into an inappropriate space. So please reword your question and respect the confidentiality of other matters.
Well, could I ask you, Mayor, do you think you have a conflict in voting on this subject?
I do not have a conflict with the matter that is here for council today. There is no, again, perhaps if I give clarity, we considered, based on the information available, the 7th of September when we started the process, the information that council has provided, the information that was tabled, and made decisions about conflicts of interest pertaining to this process. What we have before us today is a circumstance, and the reason that I felt obligated to call a special meeting to consider was that it became visible through a different process. Councillor Swanborough, please be silent. Please be silent, Councillor.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Well, Councillor, you, I'll consider your point of order respectfully, but please note you are not to participate in this discussion, so I'm being very generous allowing you to.
I think I can do a point of order if there's a breach of the standing orders, Mr. Mayor. And the conversation now has reached a point where, you know, there's consideration of my conflict of interest, but a conflict of interest has now been raised by you, so about your participation also. So what in fact that means is you need to deal with the first conflict of interest firstly, and then you'll need to I won't be here if I'm removed from the room, that's fair enough, but then your conflict of interest will need potential, which has been identified, needs to be dealt with separately.
Thank you, Councillor. Now please sit silently. Let me finish. The information, the only change to the information on which all councillors considered conflicts of interest since the 7th of September when we started the process is the matter that emerged subsequent to our decision of the 9th of November, and that gave rise to why we're here today. That is the only change in information. So the suggestion, Councillor McGuinness, you need to identify a conflict with the matter on the table. That's the basis. That's what we're here considering at this point in the meeting. Again, to Councillor McConnell's point, it's not about differences of opinion. This is about the matter before us on the table. So, Councillor Chalk.
The matter on the table right now is Councillor Swanborough has a declarable conflict of interest. So that's the matter we're dealing with right now. And that's what the questions that we've asked are considering. So maybe we need to consider moving into close so we can discuss it openly to deal with this first matter, then come back into open.
So I'm not sure what you wish to move into close to discuss, Councillor. I need clarity of that. You wish to discuss the legal advice? Councillor Chalk, to move into close, there needs to be a purpose to move, as per Councillor McConnell's comment about, to move out of open session.
Mayor, can I move that the motion be now put?
Okay. So if there's a reasonable reason to Councillor, I'll just ask your forbearance. If there's a clear purpose for moving into closed, and that would be for the purpose of discussing information that cannot be disclosed publicly, then I'm happy to ask the leeway from Councillor Enright to do that. But I need you to clarify what it is that you're wishing to go into closed for.
Yes, I'm not sure how to deal with the situation, like the rest of us in the room. We, at the very present time, we're here to consider whether Councillor Swanborough has a declarable conflict of interest, and that can only be done by non-conflicted councillors. So I'd ask all other councillors to consider whether we can do that in open.
Again, Councillor, I'm going to ask the GM if he's able to provide any assistance, but I don't believe there's a basis in that for moving into close, because these matters need to be considered in open. And again, we're dealing with conflicts relating to the resolution or the matter on the table today. So again, I'm happy to consider if there's something related to that requires it. But Councillor GM.
Mr. Mayor, listening to Councillor Chalk's word in seeking assistance and just trying to see clarity in providing that assistance, I make reference to standing orders in section 7. If I can understand in those brief terms what Councillor Chalk is trying to get to. Councillor Chalk, if you're, and that's page 4 of 18 of the standing orders, if there is, from the scanned information I believe, if there is suspicion that you think that there is an existence of another conflict of interest, there is a process for which that can occur. I'm not, to assist the conversation, I'm just not certain if that's what the, so make reference to section 7 of council's standing orders about reporting a suspected conflict of interest.
Just point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry,
The correct procedure in this particular case is that 2 people in this room have been accused of having a conflict of interest. It is not for you to defend yourself as the chair. You need to hand the chairmanship over to the deputy mayor in order to consider your thing at the appropriate time. You cannot continue to keep talking and defending yourself about your conflict of interest.
Order, Councillor.
So, yeah.
That you've had enough leeway. There was no specific conflict identified by Councillor McGuinness relating to the business of the meeting. That was not what Councillor McGuinness did not identify an alleged conflict with the business of the meeting, which is the report before us today. That's what we're considering, and whether or not there are differences of opinion and disagreements does not form a basis, to Councillor McConnell's comment earlier, for a conflict of interest. If Councillor McGuinness were identifying a conflict with the resolution, the matter that we're trying to deal with, then I'd be able to respond. All I was clarifying before was not defending myself, I was clarifying what has changed. And
Mr. Mayor, have you ever lodged a complaint against me, and are you happy about voting about that today, about removing me from the meeting?
Point of order, Councillor, you are out of order. You know well that in the jurisdictions that we operate, that there in the only jurisdiction that I have directly interacted with, I have a legal obligation to put matters of a range of matters forward for consideration, not making them as complaints. They are put forward for independent assessment, as you well know.
And exactly as I do as well, Mr.
Sorry,
Mayor.
Councillor, that is not the basis of the matter we're dealing with today, which goes back to Councillor McConnell's report earlier. We could ask everyone around the table whether they have put forward matters pertaining to others at the table. It would be irrelevant, and more importantly, it would be a breach of due process required and directed, from my point of view, I understand, by the OAA very clearly about maintaining confidentiality of those materials. As councillors know from the material in the confidential report, this is a very different circumstance that has been returned to council. Now, we shall, Councillor Enright, you're wishing to, I haven't heard any basis for moving into closed. Councillor Enright wishes to move forward with his motion.
Yes, Mayor, I stand at the procedural motion that the motion be now put, considering we are entering into difficult confidential areas.
Thank you, Councillor. You've spoken, I accept that you've spoken to it. Someone wishing to speak against the perspective that Councillor Enright's put? Councillor McGuinness?
Tied in with that, Mayor, I believe you do have a prescribed conflict of interest and you shouldn't partake in this
Sorry.
voting here. Before we vote on this, I
Sorry,
think
councillor, what's the prescribed conflict?
it's in the confidential information that we have in front of us and where your name is mentioned. And I believe you are conflicted in voting on this resolution.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, councillor. We'll pause and deal with that. And there is no basis.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. You cannot retain the chairmanship under these circumstances.
Councillor Enright, just please pause, take the chair. Gee, Councillor Swanborough, you've had great latitude for someone this morning, so please, Councillor Enright, if you'd please, I just will respond to that.
Thank you, Mayor. Would you like to respond to those previous comments by Councillor McGuinness?
That is a serious and offensive statement. I have not, and again, I'm limited from what I can comment in public in response to this, because I do respect the confidentiality of the matter and I'm not going to breach the nature of it, unlike what may have happened earlier. Very clearly, there are matters that have been unsubstantiated but alleged that rest within the confidential report, and there is no basis for it. That does not create a conflict for me with the resolution. So to suggest that I have a prescribed conflict because of the due exercise of my role as mayor within proper process would be quite extreme. And to suggest that it's a prescribed conflict would be deeply offensive, and I reject it categorically. And to suggest that it's declarable, I would also reject categorically, because there is nothing in we are not here prosecuting another matter. We are dealing with a very specific matter. And Chair, I am going to ask that we do move into closed to be able to get proper clarity about the structure and matters in the report, because otherwise I'm denied a reasonable voice to councillors.
Can I just, I know you've moved yours, but before we do that, can I move a motion that we record the closed session today to ensure transparency and accuracy of any conversation? I don't think he's listening.
Seek guidance from General Manager.
Yep, I don't think he heard.
Regarding the ability.
Yeah, foreshadow a motion.
Chair, given that with that particular matter, the question with the CEO being conflicted in the matter, I don't have the necessary powers afforded to me to make that decision on behalf of council, and I believe that that can be undertaken by a procedural motion of council deciding that matter, not the general matter of council sustainability.
Yeah, but we are the chamber is able to do it today.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, in that particular question, in technical terms, arcane methods, yes, in terms of a simple tape recorder, but that's not to compromise, obviously, the broadcast.
Correct. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder for that?
You need a procedural motion. Sorry, councillor, point of order.
Yes, correct. So those in favour.
So wait a second, can we speak to the matter?
Thank you, Mayor.
It's not a procedural motion. We have a seconder from Councillor Chalk. It's not a procedural motion.
Sorry, under section 27, the request to record is not otherwise captured. Section 27 allows for that particular, and section 27 is a procedural motion, just for clarity.
Councillor McConnell, would you like to speak to that motion?
Yeah, I believe that to ensure accuracy of any discussion, considering the nature of the item, I think we need to ensure that a recording is kept of the closed session.
Anyone like to speak against?
Yeah, Councillor, I would. I think it is a very slippery slope to start recording confidential meetings. It's not something that's done at any level. It's not something that can be done, and recording and retaining such matters creates a grave risk, and therefore the matter, it has the risk of being subject to RTI for matters out of context in the future. Setting a precedent of recording closed sessions is high risk, and could not support it as a precedent for that reason. And if it were to happen, it would need to have a very tight expiry date, because otherwise there's no mechanism for properly managing such processes into the future and management of those records.
Are there additional speakers for the motion?
Yeah, I'll speak for the motion. I think in this circumstance, Councillor McConnell's right. We need to make exception for this one purpose, and it won't set a precedent because it's a special occasion that we're doing this for.
Anyone like to speak against the motion? Any further speakers against?
Sorry, I'll let you get.
Chair, a comment rather than speaking for or against it. The other alternative is that we be in open session all the time for this today.
Thanks for the comment, Councillor McGuinness. I think that's very difficult given the confidentiality of the matter.
I'd like to make a comment, Mr. Chair, about that. The standing orders and the regulations, do permit in the public interest, despite what it says in section 254J3, all the provisions in there by reasons with the Act says we may go into closed session. It doesn't mean we should or have to. But when there's a matter that's in the public interest, it's certainly the ability of council to take a vote and decide whether that issue should be discussed in open council rather than closed council. And that's including legal opinions, Mr.
May add a comment. Those comments fail to recognise that the nature of what's in the report includes content that is prescribed as confidential by another jurisdiction beyond the local government legislation. And I think it would be very fraught for us to ignore that.
Councillor West.
Mine was just a question
Mr. Mayor. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair.
Councillor West first.
A question to me?
No, I'm asking a question to Councillor McConnell. It was really just, should the session be recorded? Would you be happy with an expiry date if there was a period of time where it's really just the question I ask, and
yeah, I'd happy
make the
with
decision?
a 12-month expiry date.
Just a comment, Mr. Chair.
Just record that. Can we have that,
Mr. Chair? Could I just provide clarity on that 12-month? It becomes an official record of council, and it needs to be dealt with as the appropriate record whatever that information is. And the top of my head, I can't make a reference to the QDAN, what the retention and what the necessary restrictions on that once it becomes a record of council.
Mr. Acting
Yes,
Chair.
Councillor Swanborough.
The confidential report contains information which would only, in my opinion, only affect me personally. And I don't see that there's any particular reason why that shouldn't be dealt with in open session. I've got to say that there's already been a breach of that confidentiality within this room. And I say that because there was a process on the 23rd of December that was carried out, and people in this room were attending that. Information was passed on to council solicitors, and it appears in the legal advice that we're looking at today. I think that is a Law Society issue for the people involved, and also that is a breach of Law Society ethics, that you can take information contained in one forum on a totally separate matter, and then use that information in a legal opinion on a totally separate matter.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Swanborough, for those comments.
So, point of order, Chair, in response, I'm disappointed that perhaps Councillor Swanborough's allowed to make that, but clearly some of the content of this report has pejorative commentary that affects multiple parties, and again relates to a separate jurisdiction. There are untested matters in there that would have significant impacts for council and for individuals in this room, should that be then discussed in public without having gone through proper due process, which is why it's contained in a confidential report. And it would be significantly harmful to multiple parties to breach that process. And again, I reiterate that there's very specific clarity from the relevant jurisdiction about how those content matters must be managed.
Chair, just seeking clarity. I believe that what's on the table at the moment is about the consideration for recording. In which case, just to point some facts and obvious around it, no one is conflicted in this matter. So technically, the chair is the original chair, the mayor. For clarity, I just got lost track of which one we were dealing with, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. You weren't alone, GM. I think we're all. These are very. This is a very difficult matters, which is what I said at the outset. Any further speakers concerning? I think we're a point of speaker against for the closed session. I'll accept the prior sequence. Sorry, Councillor McInnes, you wishing to speak?
Probably a comment, whether for or against, I don't know yet, but I take Councillor West's point about having a sunset clause of 12 months for this. I don't think it should be anywhere near as long as that, and there was an agreement there. I would like to see it just for this specific motion today. I don't think there's times where I think it could be adverse that we did have confidential and it was recorded and someone sought that a copy of that. So I would like it specifically just for this, a comment to the move of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor McGuinness. Just to the point you may have missed from the GM Council Sustainability, once that record is made, it becomes subject to other legislative requirements about the maintenance of records. Not something we have further discretion over. No, and that then does create the risk about the precedent of confidential conversations becoming public records. So
agree
just
completely.
For that clarity, Councillor, I hope that it addresses your just provides clarity to that question. Councillor Enright, did you wish?
Thank you, Mayor. If I could speak against this motion, I think confidential is confidential. I think any information that is provided needs to remain confidential. We don't go into closed easily. It's certainly something that is done when it's essential to do so. Information that could be available at a later time, I think, is inappropriate for the discussion that we are having.
Thank you. You wish to close any comment, Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, I do believe this needs to be recorded because it goes back to what the original motion for this item is, and that's the repeal of, hang on.
Rescinding the motion, councillor, but
Rescind?
that's not the matter we're considering.
I know, but
closed at the moment.
I know it's not the matter,
So we're not,
but
so
it
be
goes
clear.
back to the initial, what we're here for today. And we need to make sure that, and I believe we need to make sure we keep a record of everything that's discussed so that in future, if something comes up to light, just like it's allegedly did with this motion, that we don't have a hearsay, she said, he said. It's actually recorded and we can hear what everyone said. So I close.
Just a point of clarity, councillor. We are talking about the potential for going into a closed session within the context of considering conflicts of interest, not the business of the meeting. Not the business of the meeting at this stage. We have not.
That's right. I
So
agree
I'm
with
just
you.
being clear. So it is inappropriate to reference it to the business of the meeting at the moment. That's not what this is about at this stage.
But it pertains to it.
So no, but this is really a restricted, that we're closing the meeting for a particular purpose at this time under agenda item 4.
Thank you.
Righto. Those in favour? Those against? I'll note that as a division. That's carried 4-3, Division 1, 2, 5 and 6, and against Mayor Division 3 and 4. However, we are now moving into a closed session. We will close the broadcast. No? We can discuss it now, but we've decided we now can come back to that, and we'll hand back to you, Councillor Enright, actually.
Mr. Mayor, just for administrative, Scott, you're going to, just because of the arcane technology we've got, just to not interfere the broadcast, to utilise the microphone.
So, Mayor, just regarding the administrative aspect, if we could just scroll up to the motion for moving into closed. So we have, this is not a procedural motion, so we need a seconder to go into closed.
Can the mayor move this if he's conflicted?
Well, the mayor has asked to move into confidential so that I can properly access information to provide to councillors, because that's a serious allegation that Councillor McGuinness has raised. I deeply.
Okay, no, I was just making sure. I wasn't too sure.
So I'll call for a seconder.
I'm happy to second so that we can discuss this matter more fully.
Okay, seconded by Councillor West. I'll ask for the Mayor as the mover of the motion regarding the move into closed session.
Clearly, Councillor McGuinness has referenced something in a piece of information in the confidential report that where neither of us is able to, he's not able to clarify in public, I'm not able to respond in public, and therefore I'm significantly hamstrung in considering what he's, in responding to councillors fairly and reasonably with that restriction from another jurisdiction. And therefore, being able to access that in a closed context to better inform the discussion is really important.
Are there speakers against the motion? Any additional speakers?
Mr. Acting Chair, is that going to be the same case for dealing with my conflict of interest as well?
Thank you for the question. I believe that we will deal with one step at a time. Thank you for the question. Are there any additional speakers? If not, I will put the motion. Those in favour?
Thank you.
Carried unanimously. We'll now move into closed. Okay. Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I would now invite a mover to move back into open. Move Councillor McConnell, seconded Councillor West. Any need for discussion? I'll put that vote. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. So we return back to item 4. Declarations of interest by members. We have a motion on the table.
Point of order, Chair. I think before we move to the motion that was way back up, you need to deal with the resolution. This here of Councillor McGuinness's comment. And then we've gone in. So I believe that there is the point where we now need to resume and deal with.
Okay,
Chair, if that helps.
The most current one. So we have a motion.
No, we don't have a
motion.
motion. Don't have a motion.
We have a comment. That's right.
And again, may I just clarify a point of order? I don't believe Councillor McGuinness referred to a declarable conflict regarding item 6.1. It was a declarable conflict regarding the determination of Councillor Swanborough's conflict of interest in item 6.1. Would that be correct, Chair? I think.
That was all we were talking about at the time.
Okay, so Councillor McGuinness, are you happy with that?
Yes.
Wording of that note. So would you, Councillor, like to speak to that comment?
Yeah, I don't think we have to go into much more detail. We have had some legal advice, and I believe the Mayor should not be present while we're voting on Councillor Swanborough's eligibility or not to be here.
Mayor, would you like to make comment on?
Yes, please. As I recall, Councillor McGuinness, in raising that, suggested that that conflict arose from specific content of the confidential report, and I would like that noted, that that's where he said the conflict arose from. All I can confirm to the meeting is that at all times I've acted in accordance with the requirements of my role, as I've done today when I made the uncomfortable declaration under section 150 EW. At all times, my intent has been to ensure proper process and governance based on best available information. I do so without bias, and I accept also that from time to time matters may be alleged in other forums, however, that though such allegations do not in and of themselves give rise to a conflict of interest, a declarable conflict of interest or otherwise. And I can assure councillors that I have no matters active involving Councillor Swamborough activated from my point of view, beyond the legal obligations of my role to, from time to time, present matters pertaining to any councillor, including myself, to the proper authority, being the OIA, for their assessment. And I would put to the chamber that on that basis it is unreasonable to deem a conflict of interest on the basis of unsubstantiated allegations concerning this matter.
Could I ask perhaps a question through to governance? What is the legal process for the mayor and councillors and all councillors to report potential items outside the conduct, potential conduct, councillor conduct claims? What is the requirement for us as mayor and councillors to put that information through to the OIA?
Thank you. Chair, I might be able to add some words to that, the way I can interpret it. I guess it's littered throughout the legislation that elected members are obligated to act upon multitude of matters that's clearly prescribed in there. But I will add also that not only elected members, but also officers are under the same obligation to, where matters are observed or recognised, to do the same. So it is literally contained throughout the legislation. There's too many names in terms of what particulars you're obligated to do, but you know, roles and responsibility of councillors, code of conduct of councillors, it's spelt out in there what the expectation is of those to do, and they are closely linked or aligned to the legislation that requires them obligated to do so. Is that?
Yeah, thank you. So there is a legislative responsibility for elected members as well as executives to submit concerns where there is a potential or perceived action outside that of the code of conduct. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, and I would add also that you would breach those necessary legislations if you fail to act on it as well, not just declare or or report or do it, but you actually breached by not doing it. And if you were, by not reporting it, if you knew clearly and obviously the matter was there, and if you would also breach by not reporting it. Or not acting upon it, sorry, it should be.
And by fulfilling our legislative obligations, does that necessarily mean that you then create, you are implicated in your actions and creating a bias against a potential member, fellow elected member, or fellow elected councillor?
Chair, I'm not a legal expert, but I guess my interpretation is what's prescribed in legislation is an obligation, that there's a requirement, and I guess in one way permittable, and doesn't become deemed as what you may be referring to outside of those requirements or any other actions that's not prescribed in there. Then that's when a question would arise. But what's included in legislation, it details the roles and responsibilities and performance expectations of councillors in what they do. So that becomes part and parcel of their duties, their obligations, and the requirements. Acting outside of those, and I don't want to go into hypotheticals, but obviously acting outside of those would constitute breaches and what the like. But I don't want to sort of go into that. But what's prescribed in legislation, it clearly articulates, and the relevant documents around code of conduct, meeting orders, standing orders. It basically outlines the roles and performance and expectations of elected officials and what they're obligated to undertake and do.
Just a question, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Question is to the Mayor. Was it the case that a couple of months ago?
Point of order, I don't believe Councillor Swanborough is able to participate in the discussion of my conflict of interest because he's also an alleged conflict and should not be participating in this discussion of my alleged conflict with his participation. That would be at risk of biasing the conversation. Can I seek some governance guidance on that?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. That's what's prescribed. The matter at hand is the point that you may have a conflict. The balance unaffected councillors may ask you a question to seek clarity, but once already one defined, they can't participate in the.
Just a point of clarification. If that is the case, then it wasn't the proper process, was it? That in the start of this meeting, the Mayor prosecuted his case against me for quite some time, even though now it's learned that he has been conflicted as well.
Point of order,
Yes,
Councillor. Chair, firstly, there is no verification that the Mayor is conflicted at this point in time, and that's an offensive statement by Councillor Swanborough. I'd ask him to withdraw. There's an allegation at the moment under consideration, and therefore I again ask that Councillor Swanborough not try to bias the deliberations of the chamber in considering my matter at this time. It was very clear, as per what will be in the public record, that any allegation was dealt with immediately. It was brought up by Councillor McGuinness. The proceedings of council diverted to deal with that matter, and I take significant
point of order,
exception to
Mr. Chair.
Councillor.
At this point in time, and correct me if I'm wrong, there has been no determination of whether I am conflicted at this point in time or the Mayor has been conflicted at this point in time. Therefore, until it's put to a vote, there can be no allegation that someone is not entitled to participate in the meeting because it has not yet been determined that either of us have a conflict of interest.
I will seek clarification. My understanding is we are discussing agenda item 4, of which refers to a declaration of interest by yourself. You had
Again, that's not correct. There was a declaration of interest of an undeclared. Again, the declaration for Councillor Swanborough was not forthcoming, and in keeping with the obligations of office, there was a 150 EW declaration that was under consideration when Councillor McGuinness raised the subsequent matter. So,
correct. Yep.
You should seek governance guidance on who can participate once both of those matters are now on the table, please.
Thank you, GM. Could I seek some clarification on who is eligible to speak on this?
Or both.
Or both. Thank you, Chair. Yes, recalling back to 9 o'clock this morning under 150 EW. So the matter at hand is, a suspected declarable conflict of interest has been tabled, and in dealing with that matter, prior to that being deliberated upon whether or not it was then called upon from the floor that there may have been a suspicion that someone else within the chamber had a declarable conflict of interest, that they shouldn't participate in declaring that particular conflict of interest that was originally tabled. In which case, the point of the matter where we are at the moment is declaring the point 2, the item of the council determining the mayor having the original, so which would automatically include the fact that the original the original suspected declarable interest against Councillor Swanborough, this is still dealing with that, and then dealing with the mayor, whether he's participating in that declarable interest. So in both instances, both are out. However, as what's prescribed in the setting orders, similar to when the matter goes back to deliberating Councillor Swanborough's declarable conflict of interest, he will be then provided the courtesy to be able to field questions from what will then be the balanced council or unaffected councillors in pressing claims as to whether or not they have a declarable conflict of interest.
I wonder if you could just summarise that, please.
So long story short, the fact that this pertains to the first matter about Councillor Swanborough's suspected conflict of interest, he's particularly not able to participate in determining that particular matter, in allowing the mayor to participate in the discussions of that. The mayor is not able to participate, but is able to field questions, but both are deemed, until such time we can deal with the first one, but we've got to deal with this one at hand first. But the fact that Councillor Swanborough is conflicted with that because he's conflicted the first one is not allowed. So they're both out.
I'd have to disagree. Surely Councillor Swanborough has got a right to ask the mayor if he's conflicted. Councillor Swanborough is only conflicted with the item 6.1.
No. It's been reported that so we're dealing with item 4 at the moment, a declarable conflict of interest. So we haven't moved into the meeting proper. The fact that it was under 150 EW that there was a suspicion that Councillor Swanborough has a declarable conflict of interest in 6.1 is where we're at. We're dealing with that at the moment. We haven't progressed from that because what's then been subsequently put is in determining Councillor Swanborough's conflict of interest, it was suspected that the mayor may have a conflict of interest in determining Councillor Swanborough's conflict of interest, and that was sought to consideration that he doesn't participate in determining Councillor Swanborough's conflict of interest. Is that? So we haven't moved into the meeting proper.
Chair, could I provide a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
And just an observation. I would find it deeply unreasonable for Councillor Swanborough to be contributing to a discussion of my alleged conflict related to him that would run the risk. It should be councillors who have no involvement. Surely that would be the reasonable person perspective on that conversation.
Okay, I think we've got an answer on that, that Councillor Swanborough isn't able to.
What is the answer and who provided it?
My understanding is that a reasonable person would consider that because we are in discussion regarding the declaration of interest,
This is an abnormal circumstance.
that you must remain silent in this discussion. Councillors, we have a note of a comment from Councillor McGuinness. I don't think it's gone to a motion at this stage. I seek your understanding of our legal obligations as outlined by the GM about our responsibility to report, and that is our legal obligations under legislation. I think that's something we need to be very cognizant of, about what our responsibilities are. But I'll leave it up to my fellow councillors to give consideration.
Acting Chair, are you asking now whether the Councillor McGuinness is prepared to move it as a motion and put it on the table or not?
Yes, it is. I
It's been moved.
don't believe it had been moved. It is on the document, but I don't believe we've formally gone through the process of it being moved.
But I'll move that motion to get it on the table for debating, Acting Chair.
Through you, Chair, can we just refer to the right terminology? Lie on the table is today, defer is to another meeting.
No, sorry, I didn't think I said lie on the table, sorry, Ollie.
But if you could read out the motion for those at home.
Yeah. The motion is that the Mayor, Councillor Greg Christensen, has a declarable conflict of interest regarding the determination of Councillor Swanborough's declarable conflict of interest in item 6.1.
I just
Sorry,
point of order.
Oh, thank you.
Point of order. I just Councillor Swanborough alleged conflict of interest might be a better word, because it hasn't been determined that I have a conflict at this point in time.
Regarding the determination of, so I guess determination does ultimately cover that, whether it's the alleged conflict of
I
interest.
think it does cover it there.
Are there any questions of the mover regarding this motion? Do I have a seconder? Councillor McConnell. Councillor McGuinness, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, Mayor, Acting Chair, sorry. I believe this is the right way to go, and I think for transparency, it's unfortunately we can't talk about what's in confidence here and what we've been given, but I think the fact that there's there has been mention, and we should, it's for transparency and for the openness of council, I think we're better off the mayor not being part of this voting procedure.
Is there a speaker against the motion?
Acting Chair, I'm happy to.
Thank you, Councillor West.
Oh, thank you. Look, I know this is awkward because we're unable to really talk openly about the matter, but my belief at the moment is that the mayor has obviously been implicated, allegedly implicated in this matter, but to date the matter has not been resolved, so I don't believe he has a conflict at this stage.
Any further speakers for the motion?
And again, obviously, we can't speak about some of the stuff, but I do believe the mayor has a declarable conflict of interest in regards to this issue. So I'll be voting for the motion.
Could I have some clarification on the interpretation or the of what a declarable conflict of interest, perhaps GM, and just general and broad, what a declarable conflict of interest?
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair. This is going around in circles. I mean, we've had the debate, and now we're at a time where we're having a for and against discussion by each of the councillors about the motion which has been infinitely discussed. It is not appropriate to then go off on a tangent for whatever reason in order to seek more clarifications. But all clarifications have been done.
Sorry, Councillor Swanborough, I need some clarification to determine the correct the term declarable conflict of interest and how this could be interpreted regarding this particular motion.
Councillor, if I heard you correct, you're asking for what the definition of a declarable conflict of interest is.
Yes.
Just reading off the guideline from the Queensland Government, Department of Local Government Raising and Multicultural Affairs, a declarable conflict of interest is a situation where you might have a conflict of interest and you must declare the interest, and then either you choose to leave the meeting yourself or other councillors vote to decide whether you can participate in the decision. What is and further to that, as prescribed in the Local Government Act 2009 under 150 EN, which is subheaded, what is a declarable conflict of interest? Reading through the legal garble, it is subject to section 150 EO. A councillor has a declarable conflict of interest in a matter if A, the councillor has or could reasonably be presumed to have a conflict between the councillor's personal interest or the personal interest of a related party of the councillor and the public interest, and B, because of the conflict, the councillor's participation in a decision about the matter might lead to a decision that is contrary to the public interest. If you're asking for some layman's term, I think A is crucial in assisting councillors in making the determination that between the councillor's personal interest or the personal interest of a related party, so that is there an opportunity for a loss or a gain when it relates to personal interests.
Thank you, GM. Question to Councillor McGuinness.
Hang on. Aren't we into debate?
Yes,
we've gone back into questions and discussions, have we?
Yes, I have a question that I'd like clarification.
Oh, yeah.
Given that clarification of the relevance of a declarable conflict of interest, to help me form my decision, where is it that the personal interest is a conflict with the public interest or the related parties that involves the Mayor and Councillor Swanborough?
As has been said by Councillor West, Councillor McConnell, myself, and probably, I don't know who else, but those three at least, there's confidential information that we've been given that mentions certain people, and I believe it's, without going into that detail, that's where I base my information on. So I'm not at liberty to go into any more detail, but all councillors have had that that information passed to them in a confidential way.
Thank you. I respect the confidentiality of the items. Are there any other speakers for the motion? Are there any other speakers? It appears not. I will speak against this motion. Councillors, fellow councillors, I think we are on a very slippery slope if we are using the information in this report that is a obligation of elected representatives, elected councillors, including the Mayor, that fulfilling these obligations by submitting concerns to the OIA can be used as a form of a declarable conflict of interest against another councillor. I think that precedence would be that each one of us are potentially conflicted, if this is what you are proposing, that each one of us is going to be a future declarable conflict of interest in any matter. So I think we need to think very carefully, long and hard, about what's the intention of this motion, and that fulfilling our legal responsibilities as per the legislation is something that we don't have an option of doing. If there are no other speakers, I will put... Oh, sorry, Councillor McGuinness is right to reply.
Yes, Acting Chair, I believe this is in the public interest to be very transparent here. I hear your words slippery slope, and some might suggest that the whole day's proceedings are a slippery slope here. And I
point of order, Councillor McGuinness. I think that's very inappropriate. We're following a very important, transparent procedure.
Sorry, it's all right for you to use it, Acting Chair, the slippery slope, but not people in respect to anything else.
My point of order was in relation to your comment about the whole day's proceedings. Today we are entering on a very transparent process about integrity. So.
Okay. Anyway, that's for others to decide, I suppose. It's, I also, your comment regarding the OIA, this has nothing to do with the OIA whatsoever. The names weren't mentioned to the OIA at all, so it's not correct to say, there are plenty of people reported to the OIA, and I think that's a different sort of thing, but be that as it may, it's, I recommend the motion to council. I think it's the right thing to do for the integrity of this council to head down this slope, this path.
And just clarification to the Deputy Chair here.
Yeah.
The subject of this motion, I believe I'm entitled to a point of order, again about Councillor Swanborough seeking to influence at such a critical time in the vote.
I was asking for clarification just to confirm who will be voting on this motion. Is it 5 councillors or 7 councillors?
I'll seek clarification. It will be 5 councillors.
Thank you for that clarification.
So I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Divisions called. For divisions 2, 5 and 6. Those against divisions 3 and 4. So my understanding now is that I can hand the chair. No?
To continue to deal with Mr. Councillor Swanborough's motion.
So the
Sorry,
through the GM, can I seek some clarification on the process through to the next motion that is on the table?
Thank you, Chair. I believe we go back to the circular loop and go back to the start in dealing with this.
just deal with my conflict first.
Oh, that's right. What are the conditions imposed and.
Okay,
Under the standing orders, sorry, just getting make sure I got the right title. Under the standing orders administration conduct procedure, section 9 spells out how to deal with declarable conflicts of interest, and I refer to section 9.8 and 9.9, where 9.8 says that the councillor who is the subject of a decision may remain in the meeting while the debate is occurring and can participate by answering questions from the chairperson to assist the other councillors in making their decision. The subject councillor must not vote or otherwise participate in making a decision, but may remain in the meeting while the vote on the matter takes place and the decision is declared by the chairperson on whether the councillor may remain in the meeting and participate in deciding the matter in which the councillor has a declarable conflict of interest. Did you want me to read the other sections there?
If there is anything relevant to the stage that we're at. So I think we need to determine what the level of participation is by the Mayor in the public interest of this declaration of conflict of interest. So some of those options is that the Mayor remains in the meeting, providing input, but may not vote, or those as outlined in your guide.
I think because we've voted in the 4 that the Mayor can either stay and listen but not participate and vote because he has a conflict of interest, or he may leave. So isn't that what we have to do?
Point of order, sorry, Chair, if I may. There are a range of treatments for a conflict of interest that are available to council. determined based on what's supposedly the materiality, whilst councillors may have thought they were determining in and out with part one of the vote. That's not correct. That's an inappropriate interpretation. And you may need to seek some governance advice on the range of options to be able to progress.
Thank you, Mayor. I will ask the GM to provide that range of options that are available to us.
Thank you, Chair. I did start reading into it, but I'll get Principal Specialist Governance Insurance to read 9.9 following while I read 9.8. My voice is getting a bit broken.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. Basically, the decision now that the declarable conflict of interest has been decided upon is whether or not the affected councillor stays in the meeting or not. If the decision is the councillor stays in the meeting, then there's conditions that can be considered by the unaffected councillors as to what level of participation that affected councillor will have. And generally it's stay and take no part and just passively listen. It'll be stay and be fully involved with the discussions, and might be stay, be fully involved and vote. So just because they've got the conflict, it doesn't preclude councillors from determining what level of participation and what voting rights you may or may not provide to the councillor or the affected councillor. 9.9 in the standing orders gives some guidance in relation to what types of things you would consider in making your decision when you consider that. I'm happy to read them out if that's of an assistance, or...
Yeah, thank you if you would, John.
Yep, so 9.9 says that when deciding whether a councillor may participate in the decision making on a matter in which they have a declarable conflict of interest, the other councillors should consider the circumstances of the matter, including but not limited to. Under 9.91, how does the inclusion of the councillor in the deliberation affect the public trust? Point 2, how close or remote is the councillor's relationship to the related party, which there's no related party. If the declarable conflict of interest relates to a gift or benefit, how long ago was that received? Will the benefit or detriment which the subject councillor or related party stands to receive from the decision have a major or minor impact on them? How does the benefit or detriment of the subject councillor stands to receive compared to others in the community? And there's two more. Some of these aren't very helpful because they're not quite related to this unique situation. How does this compare with similar matters that council has decided, and have other councillors with the same or similar interests decided to leave the meeting in the past? And whether the subject councillor has unique skills, knowledge or expertise that might help make the best decision in the public interest. So there are a range of considerations, but not limited just to those. They've just been placed in there for assistance in the decision-making process.
Thank you, John, for that information. I think there's some very relevant information there that would, I think, be of interest for fellow councillors. And I think what we need to be considering is the impact and the input of the vote of the Mayor and I guess the materiality of the reference that we can't speak about in relevance to our this conflict of interest.
And Chair, I think added to that is I think it's a good idea to have the conflicted person in the room, but it's, as you pointed out, on different occasions, and I think the Mayor has himself, where it's not their role to influence the unaffected councillors in making that decision either. But if there's questions need to be answered, I haven't got any problem with the Mayor being here. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, should that have been part of the motion?
Oh, that's
No.
the next step.
Next step, okay.
Separate deliberation.
No, how do we progress from here? Don't we just agree that
Well, I'm prepared
we're going to do another
to
motion?
move the motion from the chair, acknowledging the declared conflict of interest. Just wait for.
Chair, just a point of clarity, that can be included as part of the original motion, just below the condition similar to what was found in the past, in terms of it was deemed declarable, but then you spell out whether or not the order is to leave the room or be able to participate in everything else as part of that original motion.
Thank you for that clarification. I think we'll have progressed with another motion, I think, because we've concluded on that. So I will propose that the Mayor remain in the meeting and be allowed to vote on this matter.
Sorry, that's in conflict with the motion we've just moved.
No, this is the condition relevant. So acknowledging the conflict, the declared conflict of interest, but considering the importance of the item at hand, the Mayor should be entitled to a vote. Ask for a seconder.
I'm happy to second it, Mr. Acting Chair, but in doing so, can I just mention that we are appealing an issue that happened back in November before all of this became apparent. So that's why I think the Mayor should be allowed to stay in the room and vote.
And vote. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor West, could you repeat that? I just didn't hear the last number of words.
Sorry.
I think you're all very confused.
Was that? I was seconding the motion, but I'm happy to talk about it afterwards.
Just checking the wording. Maybe acknowledging the declared conflict of interest. And considering the immateriality and importance of the item in hand.
I think you mean materiality.
Can I just ask what item? Are we talking about the motion or the item?
Oops. We're talking about the motion regarding to the conflict of interest. Okay. Yep. So motion. Thank you. We can change item, change the importance of the motion in hand. Matter might be matter. Yes, matter in hand. That the Mayor remain in the room and be entitled. The Mayor remain in the room and be entitled to vote. I just change the immateriality of the conflict and the importance of the matter in hand, that the Mayor remain in the room and be entitled to vote. Okay, so I will speak to this motion. Oh, yep.
Just in alignment with the particulars under 9.9, I know you've put in there about being able to, consideration to be able to vote, but participation also, does that include?
Sorry, remain in the room. Yeah, okay, we can change that to, and
just for clarity, that's all.
Participate, yeah. And participate. Thank you. Councillors, I will draw your attention to the significance of the motion at hand, the relevance to where this conflict of interest has come from, acknowledging the confidentiality of the item at hand. I think it's a stretch and potentially poor a difficult journey to commence on, where the and I'm just being careful with my words, where the confidential matter that has been raised in the confidential item that we are determining the importance of this particular item and acknowledge that the responsibilities of a mayor in the legislative sphere needs to be considered, and that the importance of fulfilling our duties in determining the proper process through council, I believe needs to allow the mayor to be to vote accordingly as his position of authority. Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for the motion? Councillor Lewis? Sorry. Oh.
I'm happy to take them.
Okay. So just determining that the number of people who can vote on this motion. So the non-conflicted councillors remains at 5. So I will put the vote. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is defeated. Those voting for, Councillor 3, Division 3 and Division 4. Councillors against, Division 2, 5 and 6.
Can I now move an alternate motion or a new motion?
New motion?
Yep, I'd like to move a motion that, yep. Oh, that acknowledging the Mayor's conflict of interest, that he may remain in the room and answer questions if asked, but not participate or vote. Can you just scroll up to the... Just want to make sure. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Should we put declared? Yeah, just put Mayor's declared conflict of interest. Yep.
Moved Councillor McConnell. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Chalk. Councillor McConnell, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I believe, thank you, Acting Chair. I believe this is in accordance with what we've been doing for the last 2 years. I do believe what we've, the motion before, that the Mayor does have conflict of interest. This is allows him to still answer questions if needed, and fulfils our duties. Thank you.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor West.
Chair, look, really I appreciate that the Mayor has declared his conflict of interest, but there is still at this stage only alleged implication in a matter and nothing has been resolved. So I stand by the fact that he should be allowed to vote as well. But that's fine.
Speakers for the motion? Any additional speakers? Appears not. We'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Those in favour, Division 2, 5 and 6. Those against, Division 3 and 4. So we then return, my understanding is we now return back to the original item on the table from...
No, we're back to, correction, if I can just say, we're back to the motion of Councillor Swanborough's conflict of interest. That's not the item.
Item?
You keep saying item.
Item, do I? Okay.
Yeah, we're still at
back
4.
to the motion. Yes, that was the item I was referring to. Yeah. So we have the motion that we have, and I'll read that out, that Councillor Swanborough does have a declarable conflict of interest in item 6.1 of the agenda and should not be involved in the discussion. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor West.
Was that correct? Because if it's not been involved in the discussion, it means he can vote. I'm just,
yeah,
I'm just making sure that,
yeah.
I'm not sure what the original motion was. I thought it precluded him from all.
Yeah. Well, I'll certainly put that in for clarity. Not involved in the discussion. If we use the terms that we've used before, participation.
Oh, you can change that because you did it. Yeah, sorry.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, Councillor West, do I have your permission to amend this?
You do, yes.
Motion for additional clarity. So I'll amend that to should not participate.
If I can just make a suggestion, should we do it the same as what we just did with the Mayor, where he can remain, answer questions if asked, but not vote? Because if you put do not participate, then he's not allowed to speak.
Yes, happy that we consider that. Where are we? So if we can bring the may remain in the room prior to participate, should not participate.
Not
You want to
participate or
remove,
vote.
you want to remove the first not participate. The secretary can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Councillor.
Sorry, righto.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, Secretary.
Yep, that's
That Councillor Swanborough does have a declarable conflict of interest in item 6.1 of the agenda, and may remain in the room and answer questions
Not participate.
if asked, but not participate or vote.
Surely is not participate part of answering questions?
Maybe just, but not vote, would it be? Is that
Not participate or vote.
Yeah, okay. So,
okay. So, oh, that's yours, isn't it? Sorry.
yes.
Forgot where it was.
So, councillors, I will speak to this motion. I think it's important that we look at how to decide if participation is in the public interest. And I'll refer you to the Queensland Government handout. There are a number of questions that is important to consider about the declared conflict of interest. And we really need to consider what is the best of the public interest, and whether a councillor's involvement will negatively affect the community's trust in the decision. How close is the councillor's relationship to the related party? Will the decision have an impact on the councillor or related parties? So I think we really need to consider that, given the information that has been provided, we apply the pub test, if we call it that, or the test. And the real test is whether a reasonable and fair-minded person could lose trust that the decision was made in their best interests. And given the information that we are aware of, in my mind, there is no doubt that Councillor Swanborough does have a declarable conflict of interest in item 6.1 and should not participate or vote on item 6.1. Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Connell?
Don't we discuss and questions?
You certainly can.
So I'd like a question to Councillor Swanborough on, just let me think how I'm going to phrase this. There are items that are confidential. How confidential were they that you could not let us know? What is the what is the legal parameters for those confidential matters that you had that you couldn't let us know?
Thanks for the question, Councillor McConnell. All of the matters that I've been dealing with through, whether it be the Human Rights Commission, through the
Point of order, I think we're really, point of order, we need...
Breached my rights.
Thank
you very much.
Okay, well the answer is simply all of them.
Please withdraw.
The answer is all of them. The law is quite specific, and the reason you do not disclose them in most cases is because it's likely to jeopardise your own case. So to disclose them would be to your own detriment, and that is the message that you get from all of these organisations. That's why they demand confidentiality.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Are there any speakers against the motion?
Aren't we still in, don't we have to go questions and discussions and then...
Well, I did ask if there's any further questions and there wasn't.
No, but then you spoke for the motion.
Correct.
When you should have asked questions and discussion, and then you speak for the motion.
Would you like me to speak to the motion again?
He did ask.
Well, you have, but yeah, okay.
That's right. So are there any... Councillor McGuinness, would you wish to speak?
Yes, Mayor, acting chair, sorry. Been there that long. Yeah, fair day. I believe Councillor Swanborough should be here, just like everyone should be participating in something like this, and it's affecting all of it, and I think it affects the credibility of council too, that we all be here and involve ourselves in the discussion and the motion at hand. Yep, that's where I sit on the subject. I believe he should be here.
Are there any speakers to the motion? Councillor McConnell, did you?
Against the motion?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with Councillor McGuinness. I think the item that this is referring to should have a full vote, and I don't believe that that Councillor Swanborough does have a declarable conflict of interest, and I think he should be able to remain, participate and vote on the motion.
In my right of reply, councillors, we have significant information in the confidential report which we aren't able to refer to. In my mind, this clearly demonstrates that Councillor Swanborough has a declarable conflict of interest. The most appropriate way to deal with this is through using the standing orders in dealing with how this is best dealt with. It's very clearly outlined in the legal advice, which I'm sure you have all read. and we need to restore and ensure that continued good governance and ethical and legal behaviour in the public interests remain in this chamber. So, I will now put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is lost. Councillors for the motion, councillors divisions 4, 3 and 4. Those against, councillors 2, 5 and 6. So I think that we have completed that part of the declaration of interests, and at that I believe I can hand back to the Mayor.
So I'm not sure. I just need clarity.
Yeah.
What was actually resolved? Nothing was resolved. That was voted down. Was there an alternative?
I beg your pardon.
Well, no,
Yeah.
well, I would have thought, Acting Chair, that the fact that it's voted down, that means he can remain in the meeting.
Doesn't determine whether there's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, if for transparency you want a motion.
But, okay. Yeah.
Follow what's prescribed as standing orders. It's even if it's voted down, you still have to provide.
Okay, that means just for completeness.
For completeness, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll move that Councillor Swanborough be allowed to stay in the meeting for item 6.1.
As a suggestion, if I could, Mr Chair.
Yep.
Councillor McInnes, wouldn't we have to state that Councillor Swanborough does not have a declarable conflict of interest and can remain in the meeting? Wouldn't that be the motion?
We can add those words. Doesn't worry me. I think by being allowed to stay in means that he hasn't got a declarable conflict.
So we have a mover for this motion. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Chalk. Are there any additional questions? Okay, Councillor McInnes, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, it's. I believe, as I said there a few moments ago, that I think it's in the interest of council and openness that we have all councillors here present for this 6.1, and I endorse a motion to my fellow councillors that are able to vote.
Speakers against the motion?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Acting Chair. Look, clearly, and I know we can't discuss the legal advice, which is in confidential, but very clearly, I do believe that Councillor Swanborough does have a conflict of interest in item, wherever we are, item 6.1. So I can't support the motion.
Are there any speakers for the motion? Councillor Chalk.
Yeah, thank you, Acting Chair. So I believe that Councillor Swanborough is well within his rights to use the avenues out there to investigate things. So I don't believe he has a conflict. It's the best outcome for council that all councillors are involved in this decision. And I think the right decision is to support this motion.
Any additional speakers? Councillor McGuinness, would you like to close?
Yes, just in making a final point on it, I'm sure I'm like all council, I've read and reread the advice from our legal advice until I think I'm just about a lawyer sometimes, and apart from I've got common sense, I shouldn't say that. But we, and it, like all legal advice, it's not black and white, and they leave openings there, and it can be interpreted in different ways, and that's what the legal people have done here too. And it's no such thing as a sure thing, and we see that in courts all the time, and it's only an opinion, and it's left to us to decide this one way or another. And I believe it is the right way to go.
I will now put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Those for, councillors 2, 5 and 6. Those against, councillors 3 and 4.
Now your hand back.
Thank you. I'll now hand the chair back to the Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. What an interesting session. Councillors, we will now move to the consideration of what we're here for today. However, to do so, we have one item that is a confidential matter and must now be dealt with in confidential. So I seek a motion to move into closed. Thank you, Councillor West. Seconder to that.
Can I just ask why it all has to be enclosed?
Well, we'll have to come out and pass a vote in open, but again, because the content of the matter crosses over into confidential matters. Well, they were until someone made a comment before and breached certain aspects of that. However, it's supposed to remain confidential. And we're duty bound to maintain confidentiality of that report. If you remove it into an open matter, that report then has to become an open report.
I'm only asking.
Yeah, well, I'm clarifying.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
So I thought that had been clarified a number of times previously today. So seconder. Thank you, Councillor Enright. Any discussion? Those in favour? Those against? Okay. Noted division. Those in favour, divisions 1, 3, 4, 5, 6 and Mayor, and those against Division 2. However, we have a majority. We now move into closed. Thank you to those in the gallery. We'll return who knows when. Councillors, I seek a resolution to return into open. Councillor West, thank you. Councillor Enright, second. Further discussion of that resolution? If not, we put the motion to return into open. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Councillors, the reason for returning at the moment is during the course of certain parts of the conversation and questioning regarding this matter, a realisation has come to me of a reasonable suspicion in light of conversations earlier today that there may exist a level of declarable conflict for the majority of councillors who represent council as the body corporate, apart from any others who may have been involved with matters that are in the confidential report. That creates a dilemma for us. In dealing with the reasonable suspicion, we can't discharge a voting of that because it potentially affects all of us. And I would therefore propose in the context of that to ensure that we don't have any further impediments, that we, with the assistance of officers, that we prepare a communication to the relevant minister to seek guidance on how to consider and deal with these matters, and to that we will consider the detail of that letter at a subsequent council meeting prior to submitting it to the minister. Sorry, Linda's got to try and... I'm happy to put the detail of his title in there, but it's just too long a title at the moment. Been a long day.
Basis of something you said.
Prior to submission of that communication. That's what is that a reasonable perspective?
You have to put in there, they've declared, also the perceived conflict of interest in that.
So,
Because that's a guidance we're seeking.
yep, seeking after 2009. After 2009, pertaining to the potential declarable conflicts of interest.
Then just to, that section, it's titled about whether they're involved. So I guess it's one way of getting there. But
yep. I think this is just for public clarity, I think, is what Councillor McConnell's seeking. I think that.
Wouldn't it just be that council prepare a communication?
Well, technically, it might actually be, it's potentially for the mayor to prepare, but to bring it back for consultation with councillors before submitting.
Okay.
Okay.
After conflicts of interest, would it be item 6.1?
Not necessarily.
Well, no, it is in relation to the item, but that's that's obvious. Well, it pertains to the business of the special meeting.
Seek clarification on the last sentence to include discussions with prior to submission of that communication.
Yep. So that's, I believe that, I interpret that as a direction for me to bring back a final proposed version for review with councillors prior to submission to the Minister.
Communication to the Minister.
Yep, that's fine. It's a bit redundant for me, but that's okay.
Getting into specifics, Mayor, is council suitable to accept to view that via a 5-minute rather than reconvene?
I'm not sure. I would be my answer. So we'll review it through an appropriate forum, which may be a flying minute, but it's more likely to be a dialogue.
Otherwise, the meeting will be able to take up the ordinary meeting of the 18th.
So yeah.
Can I suggest that you put that the Mayor prepare with assistance of officers within 14 days, or maybe 7 days might be enough. So after that, we put within 7 days.
Well, I'm not sure of schedules, but I would be happy, Councillor, I would be happy with as soon as reasonably practicable, which may be 7 days, it may be 7.5 days, it may be 5 days. And the reason I say that is under COVID circumstances, we could quickly have officers not become available and that could mess the time. So can I please have the respect for that circumstance as soon as reasonably practicable?
We have 3 officers in the room who are perfectly capable of writing such a letter right here. I don't think it would be a difficult task to write the letter.
Councillor, if we don't have 3 officers here, the CEO won't become involved in it.
Well, you've got 2 officers here. I mean, it only takes 1 officer to write a letter. It'd take a couple of hours.
Councillor, I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just trying to be reasonable and recognise that COVID is causing uncertain impacts to our workforce and to others. And if you can tell me for sure which officers won't become exposed, you're doing far better than anybody else is. So I'm just allowing for I'm committed to getting it done as soon as possible, and that will be determined by the availability and accessibility, but it won't be delayed. So
well, it'll be interesting to watch how long it takes, Mr. Mayor.
I hope there's nothing offensive I should interpret from that, Councillor. It would be disappointing if that was used as a soundbite for negative purposes, but I've committed to do it as soon as reasonably practicable under the circumstances we currently face. I can't do more. I think that's a reasonable person would see that as a reasonable, logical perspective. Okay.
Shouldn't the word guidance be to seek a decision in relation to how to deal with the matter, not just guidance?
That's what EV will provide.
Yep.
The things that then
Section 150 EV provides the specifics of that, Councillor, what the wording of it is. That's the reference. Okay, I'm happy to accept those pieces of wordsmithing.
Can we just read that out so the public are aware of the full motion, please?
I'll read it out, that the Mayor prepare with the assistance of officers as soon as reasonably practical communication to the relevant minister to seek guidance as per section 150 EV of the Local Government Act 2009 pertaining to the potential declarable conflicts of interest, and to include discussions with councillors prior to submission of that communication. I'm very comfortable to table that. I seek a seconder. Councillor West. I'll reserve the right to speak. Anyone wishing to speak against?
Well, I have to speak against because I wasn't party to the conversation in relation to it. So, yeah, I don't know exactly why we're doing this potentially, but yeah, so I'll be voting against it.
Everyone speaking for?
I'll be voting for it, but I think it's pertinent that I comment this whole day, the reputation of council has dived again, and I think it's a sad day for the community's view on all of us around this table, that this has, how this has played out. And I don't think we have much other choice than to head down this track, but it's, I think it has eroded the confidence of, and I didn't think it could get much lower, but it's got lower all the time, and the whole scenario hasn't been managed very well here, I don't think.
Point of order, Mayor. I think that comments are inappropriate.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's my opinion. It's,
So, Councillor, you're just, I think what Councillor Enright's pointing out is you're speaking for the motion rather than about other matters. So,
talking the process, and yeah, and I don't think we've got any other choice, because the way we've been let down here in advice from quite a number of quarters.
anyone else speaking against?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll speak against. Yeah, I'm on the same vein as Duncan. This is quite embarrassing, I think, for what we've done today. You know, I think today we've sort of resolved that this external matter shouldn't conflict us dealing with 6.1, and now it's been brought to light at the last minute that, you know, we're trying to have everyone with a potential conflict. You know, I think we could have dealt with this as 7 members across this chamber representing our community. To rehatch this a third time is you know, just unconceivable, really. So, you know, I'm going to vote against this motion. I thought we resolved this in the last 5 or 6 hours of deliberation, but obviously we may not have. Thank you.
Speaking for? Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Oh, sorry, you go.
Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I appreciate what the comments by Councillor Chalk and also Councillor McInnes. The difficult thing is there is this new legislation that we're all dealing with conflicts of interest, which have come along, which we have to deal with in the appropriate fashion. And I really see in this instance we don't have any choice but to take the measures that we are. So I certainly support the motion.
Anyone else to speak against? Anyone else wishing to speak additionally for? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. It has been a long day, but I think it's been a day about principle. And I think it's about ensuring that everything is transparent and accountable. And this is one further step in that direction. I can understand that members of the community who may be listening, I give you a gold star for your endurance. This is really about ensuring that we are following due and proper process, and while the community is not aware of the items that are confidential in relation to this particular agenda item, it may seem difficult for them to understand the complexity. However, I think it's important that we do follow due process and ensure that any decision that comes from council is done in the proper process. And if this requires going to the Minister to seek clarification in regard to this rather complex matter, then I think this is the process that is due and proper to follow.
Thank you. Wishing to speak further, Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Mayor, thank you. As much as I disagree with the motion, I have to vote for it on principle that if a councillor identifies a conflict of interest, it needs to be rectified, and the fact that someone has possibly identified that all councillors have a conflict, we can then not in good faith, consider it ourselves. It'd be a dangerous precedence to set if we were to decide that a councillor's opinion on a conflict of interest that they believe affected all councillors was not the case. If we were to do that, it'd set some things in motion that wouldn't be good, I think. I agree with what Councillor McGuinness said. This whole process from start to finish from back in September has been flawed and brought us to this to where we are now, and I hope that we learn from this and we get this guidance back from the Minister sooner rather than later, and we can move on. Thank you.
And Mr Mayor, I'd like to have
So
final
you've already
comment.
spoken against, Councillor.
Yeah, but this is additional comments.
Sorry, Councillor, you don't. Why would you get to make additional
Because I
comments?
thought you
You've
asked
spoken
for.
against.
I thought you asked for.
I asked anyone is still wishing to speak additionally. Wasn't
Yeah.
asking for additional
Yeah.
comments to the
Additional.
motion. You've already
Speak
spoken to the motion,
But
Councillor.
speaking additionally, isn't that?
Any other speakers to speak additionally, not for you to have a second bite of the cherry, Councillor. Sorry, nice try. As the mover, I will speak to it. I think there are many aspects that eventually there needs to be learning from. There are some concerning aspects of events that have occurred along the way. Putting this forward is not about doing anything other than ensuring that we have dotted I's and crossed T's based on aspects that were discussed in confidential. That particular matter has created a level of complexity being able to discuss this today, and I agree with some earlier comment from Councillor McConnell, that's a frustration. However, it is necessary to give natural justice protection to matters until such time as they are fully discharged. So this is an opportunity to ensure that we dot I's, cross T's from the Minister's point of view on this matter, to be able to proceed with whatever course is necessary.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion.
Sorry, Councillor. I'll consider. I'm not.
Yep.
We've gone through all of the discussion. You're very late to start moving an amendment, Councillor.
Yeah, but it's still allowable under the standing orders, Mr Mayor. We've waited 6 hours to get to here.
Sorry,
Waiting
Councillor.
a few extra few minutes might
please,
not
I'm not
be too bad.
in the dialogue. Please just say what you're proposing an amendment as.
The amendment is that that the meeting acknowledged that Councillor Swanborough was asked to leave the meeting for discussion on this matter.
Sorry, Councillor, that's not correct. You were not asked to leave the meeting for discussion of that matter.
Well, discussion in relation to the multiple conflicts of interest.
Again, Councillor, that wasn't what you were asked to leave the meeting for. That is a misrepresentation of what happened in closed, Councillor.
Well, would someone like to explain to me why I was asked to leave the meeting?
Because, well,
Mr Mayor, there's elements of here that was being released that we're discussing confidential.
yes, and I'm concerned that we're now breaching what was in confidential, which is why I was pulling that up. I believe it is not appropriate to talk about anything that occurred in confidential, Councillor. It was very clear what the purpose of those conversations was, and that would be a misleading amendment that I'm not prepared to have, and it would also breach the confidentiality of aspects of the closed portion of the meeting.
Well, I haven't even got to the end of it yet, and I don't think there's anything
Councillor,
there.
I'm cautious because you are sharing matters that were enclosed, which are required to stay enclosed.
I think it's a procedural thing, Mayor, that whilst you don't take minutes in a closed session, but I think the public and everybody has the right to know that I didn't participate in all the discussion in relation to what happened in closed session.
Councillor, that's nothing to do with this motion. And again, Councillor, to discuss that and without discussing the reason why would be to mislead the public, and discussing the reason why would then compromise confidentiality. That is the complexity of the matter. And
I'm happy to word it any way you like, Mayor, but I want it recorded that I was asked to leave the meeting for 20 minutes.
Well, Councillor, I'm not, you want to propose that. That has not an amendment that has relevance to the matter above. It's a separate item and it does not relate to it. And you are now, I'm cautioning you that if you do wish to then consider that as an additional motion, that you're breaching aspects of the confidential meeting. And even by tabling it in the way you have, I believe you're breaching aspects of the confidential meeting. I understand your desire, but you need to be cognizant of the nature of the confidential matter that has given rise to this, and that we're trying hard to respect that, which led to what happened in the confidential section of the meeting, which doesn't relate to this.
This, Mr. Mayor, this relates purely to attendance. And I can't see any problem in people knowing whether I was in attendance.
It is not a relevant part to the motion above.
Well, I foreshadow that we'll have another motion after this one's completed.
Can I just ask that we do point 2, that the meeting acknowledged that Councillor Swanborough was not in for the majority of the closed session? Would you be happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I've been saying all along.
He's going to vote on it, but he wasn't in major discussion.
I believe that still doesn't form a part, for me, that doesn't form a part of my original motion, but I'm happy if you want to propose that, that we'll then discuss it. I believe that can sit as a separate matter.
A separate motion would be more appropriate in my
Couldn't it
view.
be part 2?
I think it's a separate issue.
It's a very separate issue.
It's related to that issue.
You can leave my motion.
It's related to trying to respond to matters in confidential without, and talking more about that without breaching the confidential meeting is very difficult.
Correct,
So-
but can't we just acknowledge in part 2 of the motion that Councillor Swanborough was not in for the majority of that closed session?
That's not relevant to that motion. I'm saying that that would be a separate motion. If you feel that that's something you want to put, it would be a separate motion, would be my view.
Well, it is in relation to that matter, so I don't know why it's a separate
I
motion.
would agree.
Well, I'm not sure how Councillor Swanborough can conclude that, but Councillor McConnell, I'm just saying a statement such as that doesn't add value to the actions identified in the motion, is all I'm saying. It is better to stand as a standalone item.
Mr. Mayor, it's not for the Mayor to determine what adds value
Sorry,
to someone else's amendment.
Sorry, I'm just, so I'm flagging, Councillor. Firstly, your recommendation that's there is, even by describing it in the way you have, creates a conflict with a disclosure of what was discussed in the confidential.
I had agreed to change it to what Councillor McConnell had said. So let's put up what Councillor McConnell had said, because that's what I'd agreed.
That the meeting acknowledged that Councillor Swanborough was not in the room during the majority of the closed session. And leave it at that.
I'm happy with that, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
You got a seconder? Speak to your amendment, Councillor.
I think it's self-explanatory. Thank you, Mr.
Speak
Mayor.
against? Anyone seeking to speak additionally? Councillor McConnell, were you wanting to speak?
No, I'm good. Oh, sorry.
I will speak against this being part of that motion because it's a separate item that doesn't add materially to the direction that's in the recommendation above, and perhaps creates a distraction to the conversation and is better served as a separate item. Any other seeking to speak? Councillor Swanbury, you wish to close?
No, Mayor, that's fine. Let's put it to the vote.
Those in support of the amendment? Those against? Amendment's carried. Surprise 4-3. No to division. Return to the motion. As the mover for, in the expediency of time, accept that as a separate statement, as a part A, not as part of the, as a separate statement in the motion, which was what, but not forming part of that original paragraph, so that it doesn't confuse. So you just put it below on a separate line.
So it'll be 1 and 2, is that what you're saying?
So I don't intend to reread it because we've already read it out 3 times, both parts. It's a dangerous place of disclosing the happenings in a closed meeting, and I find that quite bemusing for councillors who are talking about good governance. However, Councillor, I'm happy to accept that. Second, are you happy to accept that?
Yes, Mayor.
We are at the completion of discussion. I don't wish to revisit anything now that the motion's been modified. Don't believe there's any basis for going around again with commentary before. Those in favour? Those against? The motion's carried. Division called by the Mayor. Those for 2, 3, 4, 6 and Mayor, and those against 1 and 5. I believe that brings us to the close of our deliberations at this time. Thank you for those who've endured with us. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers. Sorry? I don't believe we can do anything with it at the moment.
Everyone's conflicted on.
We just can't address it at the moment. It just has to say it stays on the table. We don't have to lay it on the table. It just stays there. It automatically stays there until we get the answer. Thank you for the question, councillor. Good afternoon. We call the meeting closed at, what is that, 2:46.